I'm not sure if you noticed last week, the government made a dramatic announcement that they're sending the troops to the Middle East to sort it all out. All 6 of them, 6 troops they're sending to the Middle East, not to Gaza. No, that sounds far too dangerous. They're sending them. I mean, it is a serious situation. We were talking about this with Robert Patman on Friday with the Houthi rebels and the causing a bit of havoc in the shipping lanes in the Red Sea. But not so much about the foreign, what's happening internationally and what this means in terms of international relations, but what this means, I suppose, as a signal for the new government's foreign policy approach. Joining us on the program is Director of Research and Development at the Maxim Institute, Marcus Roberts. Marcus, kia ora. Good morning.
Kia ora, Andrew.
I mean, this is perhaps an unusual start. I've just got to start with a number. 6 troops to the Middle East. Is that the best we can do? Because that's almost, well, that is embarrassing. Marcus, let's face it.
I think it's embarrassing when it's coupled with the fact that the defence minister, when discussing this, mentioned that or conceded that this is probably the best we could do.
6.
So if it is the best you can do, you send 6, but don't say anything. You say, of course, we've got many more we could send.
This is just the beginning.
It's just the beginning. Don't make us go for the next 6. But yeah, so apparently, and I think this is a serious point underneath the laughter, is that we have very strained military resources. So to send 6 intelligent gathering and precision targeting support troops to the Middle East, apparently that's left the cupboard fairly bare.
Yeah, and hey, to be fair, it's not Judith Collins' first rodeo either. So for her to say, there's so little that we have here, I don't know, maybe we need to increase the budget. I mean, that's in the interest of her portfolio, surely, right?
And you saw the headlines this morning, which is that she needs more money for defence and needs to be exempted from the across-the-board cuts that the new government is putting in. So, yes, there's a bit of manoeuvring going on there.
A bit of positioning in that regard. But I suppose let's talk about the positioning when it comes to foreign policy. And, I mean, I don't think this is going to be the big foreign policy issue of this year. More likely to be a little bit closer to home, possibly to do with Taiwan, but we'll wait and see how the year unfolds. But what does this say about, I mean, not necessarily from a defence point of view, but from a foreign policy point of view, what sort of signal does this flag?
Well, I think this has been attacked, or at least commented on, as a shift, a huge shift. It's been mentioned. I'm not entirely convinced that it is a huge shift. We have deployed troops with our allies and partners and friends around the world in various locations, unfortunately often the Middle East. But sometimes we choose to do so, such as this time. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we choose not to, like the Second Gulf War in Helen Clark's time. Yeah. And so these are decisions that we always make. So there's been talk about getting rid of our independent foreign policy, effectively becoming, America's poodle. That's the underlying message, I think, with some of this concern. But I just don't think it's true at all. I think that this is part of our assessing our interests and deciding what's in the best interest for New Zealand. And sometimes assessing that interest includes taking into account what our friends and allies, who quite frankly we rely on, want and need. And so you make a bit of a cost-benefit analysis. And you say, actually, we're going to support you here because we need to keep the relationship friendly. I don't think that's all that's going on here, but it's a big part of it.
Is independent foreign policy, I mean, it's a nice theory, and we like to think, we're independent, we can do whatever we like. Yeah, but exactly. given how small we are, given how dependent we are, not just militarily, as we say, 6 troops and we're done, but how dependent we are from a trade point of view, then that actually how independent can we be? Don't we live in this interdependent world? And hey, if we're not America's poodle, we're China's Shar-Pei. Either way, we kind of need to be the lapdog to some of the bigger dogs. Otherwise, we're not going to make it in this big, bad world.
Yeah, that's right. I think 2,500 years ago, a Greek historian Thucydides said, "The strong did what they can, and the weak suffered what they must."
Yeah.
And I think that's a very bald way of describing it. But you have to realize what reality is facing New Zealand, and so to say we've got an independent foreign policy where we have no constraints on what we can decide to do is completely it's make believe.
Yeah.
We have some very strong constraints on what we can do. We have limited options because of our defense forces being so small, because our economy is small. We are a small country.
Yep.
We rely on shipping, as you say, to make our way in the world, to sell our goods overseas, and to import everything effectively that we don't make here, which is pretty much everything.
Yeah.
And so how do we ship our goods anywhere? We rely on those shipping lanes to be safe and relatively cheap. What's happening in the Red Sea shows what happens when you don't have safe shipping lanes. The Red Sea is effectively cut down, shut off from shipping. That's about 12% of the world's shipping route having to be rerouted. Adds cost, it adds time, and that's not going to affect just the neighboring countries. It's going to affect the whole world, including New Zealand.
Yeah.
So these are the sorts of realities we need to be aware of. Who has protected our shipping in the last half century, more than that, since World War II?
Yep.
America. And so those are the realities.
Yeah, and certainly to be able to signal to the world with our allegedly independent foreign policy, that we believe in a world where there are free shipping lanes. We believe in a world where you can transport your goods to the country that wants to buy them. I mean, that's a good signal. But in terms of independence, there's still a certain amount of independence. For example, we can say, hey, we've got a nuclear-free policy, but we're still happy to have conversations about whether or not we're going to become sort of an adopted member of AUKUS, although we won't get the submarines, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole point, is that independent foreign policy means, well, it either means we're free to do what we want, which is untrue, or it means we get to make the decisions within those constrained circumstances, in which case it's clearly true. And so to say, this decision to send troops to Yemen is undermining our independent foreign policy, it's nonsense. We have an independent foreign policy. Sometimes that means choosing to support the US in certain things, like in Yemen. Sometimes it means deciding not to, like supporting their votes in the UN on Israel, for example. Both times we are exercising our foreign policy choices within those constrained realities. And so, look, I just hate the phrase independent foreign policy. It's
sorry I brought it up.
It's a way for us to backslap ourselves and to say, look at us punching above our weights and tell ourselves all the myths we like about New Zealand being a big player on the world stage. We're not. I'm sorry, we're not. And what we need to be is realistic about our foreign policy, realistic about our position in the world, realistic about who our friends are. You've mentioned China earlier. Look, this is a dangerous world. It's getting more dangerous. This idea of everything will just stay peaceful if we do nothing is just not true.
And certainly a lot of pressure at the moment to pick a side. Is it going to be China or is it going to be America? Is it going to be Palestine or Israel? There's a lot of people lining up on either side of this fight. But I suppose we need to remember we're a little dog in this fight. And we may have an annoying little bark, but there's no point.
The Australians would think so.
Well, exactly. But hey, there's no point going it alone on this one. We're going to need some alliances. We're going to need some relationships in what is continuing to unfold in the world.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem, Andrew, is that the last sort of 70 years, we've been in a very historically peaceful, particularly New Zealand, other parts of the world obviously not. We've been in a peaceful, prosperous time, and I think we've started to subconsciously assume that that's the state of things, that you don't need to do anything else for this to continue. And historically, this is very, very rare. You don't have a lot of peace and prosperity, unfortunately, in this world. And so for it to continue, we need to work on it. And I think the problem is that we kind of assume that if we just let things keep going or we leave it up to the UN, they'll be able to sort things out. As Stalin once said in World War II, how many soldiers does the Pope have? How many soldiers does the UN have? It doesn't. It relies on people to enforce its will. Who does it rely on? the US.
Exactly. And hey, whilst we're talking canine metaphors, the UN is a bit of a toothless dog in some of these fights. But hey, there we have it. Marcus, appreciate your thoughts. Now, an article on this topic is going to be published on the Maxim website by the end of the week, maxim.org.nz. Appreciate what you do. Thanks for the conversation.
Thanks so much, Andrew. Have a great day.